My name is Jack, and I need to tell you a story that will probably make you never trust a bank employee again. A story about how a navy blue polo shirt and a fake ID badge turned me into one of the most successful loan fraudsters in Chicago's history, and how that same success destroyed not just dozens of families, but eventually my own. It all started on a rainy Tuesday morning in March 2019. I was 24, broke, and sitting in the waiting area of a Chase Bank branch on Michigan Avenue, staring at my overdrawn account balance on my phone. -847. My rente was 3 weeks overdue. My car had been repossessed the week before, and I'd exactly 12 in cash to my name. I wasn't there to beg for a loan extension. I'd already tried that twice. I was there because my landlord had given me an ultimatum: pay up by Friday or get evicted. As I sat there watching the bank employees in their crisp uniforms helping customers, something clicked in my brain, something dark and desperate. The employee who called my name was named Marcus, according to his badge. Mid-30s, confident, smile, expensive watch. He led me to his desk and pulled up my account with practiced efficiency. "So, Mr. Thompson, I see you're interested in discussing your account status," he said, his tone professional but not unkind. "Actually, I was hoping to discuss loan options," I lied, knowing full well my credit score was somewhere in the basement. Marcus clicked through several screens, his expression growing more sympathetic by the second. "I'm afraid with your current financial situation, traditional loan products aren't going to be an option right now." But as he spoke, I wasn't really listening. I was studying everything about him: the way he moved his mouse, the screens he accessed, the casual authority in his voice. I was memorizing the layout of his desk, the Chase-branded materials scattered around, the way other employees greeted him as they passed by. "However," Marcus continued, "there are some credit counseling services I can recommend, and we do have a financial hardship program that might help you avoid some of the overdraft fees." I nodded and thanked him, but my mind was already somewhere else entirely. As I left the bank that day, I wasn't thinking about credit counseling or hardship programs. I was thinking about how easy it had looked, how simple it would be to sit on the other side of that desk. That evening, I went to a uniform store in Chinatown and bought a navy blue polo shirt that looked exactly like the ones Chase employees wore. $47, almost half of my remaining money. Then I went to a print shop and had a fake Chase employee badge made with my photo and the name Michael Stevens. Another $30. The next morning, I walked into a different Chase branch on the south side, wearing my fake uniform and badge. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone could hear it, but I forced myself to walk with the same confident stride I'd observed in Marcus. "Good morning," I said to the security guard at the entrance, flashing my badge quickly. "Michael Stevens, I'm covering for someone in personal banking today." The guard barely glanced at the badge. "Morning, Mike. Coffee's fresh in the break?" "Room." Just like that, I was inside. I found an empty desk in the personal banking section and sat down, trying to look like I belonged there. The computer was locked, but I'd expected that. Instead, I focused on observing and learning. I watched how the real employees interacted with customers, listened to their phone conversations, memorized their scripts. Around 10 a.m., an elderly woman approached my desk. She was well-dressed, probably in her 70s, with kind eyes and an expensive handbag. "Excuse me, are you available to help me with a loan application?" she asked. This was it, the moment that would change everything. "Of course, Mrs." I said, standing up with what I hoped was a professional smile. "Patterson, Eleanor Patterson." "Please have a seat, Mrs. Patterson. I'm Michael Stevens, and I'd be happy to help you today. I had no computer access, no real authority, no actual ability to process any loans. But I had something else: desperation and a gift for making people trust me." "What kind of loan were you interested in today?" I asked, pulling out a notepad to look official. "Well, my grandson is starting college next year, and we're looking at a home equity loan to help with the costs. We own our house outright. It's worth about $400,000. My pulse quickened. $400,000. This sweet grandmother was sitting across from me, trusting me completely, talking about an asset worth more than I'd ever dreamed of having. "That's wonderful that you're helping with his education," I said, and I meant it. "Let me get some basic information from you, and then I can walk you through our best options." For the next 30 minutes, I collected every piece of information I could from Mrs. Patterson. Her full name, address, social security number, date of birth, employment history, bank account numbers. She gave it all freely, trusting the uniform and the badge and the official-looking notepad. "Now, Mrs. Patterson, our best home equity product right now has a very competitive rate, but there is some urgency involved. We're offering a special promotion this week only, and I'd hate for you to miss out." I was making it all up as I went along, but the words flowed naturally. Years of being broke had taught me how to be persuasive when I needed something. The application process usually takes several weeks, but because you're such a valued customer, I can expedite this for you. I just need you to sign some preliminary paperwork, and I can get the ball rolling today. I pulled out some generic forms I'd grabbed from a stack on another desk, account opening documents that looked official enough to someone who wasn't reading carefully. Mrs. Patterson signed everything I put in front of her. As she left the bank that day, she shook my hand and thanked me for my excellent service. She told me I was the most helpful bank employee she'd ever worked with. She said her grandson was lucky to have people like me looking out for his future. I watched her walk away, and for a moment, I felt sick to my stomach. This kind woman had just trusted me with her most sensitive financial information, and I was planning to use it to steal from her. But the feeling passed quickly, replaced by something else: excitement. I had just pulled off the impossible. I had walked into a bank, impersonated an employee, and convinced a customer to give me everything. I needed to access her accounts. That night, I researched everything I could about home equity loans, credit applications, and banking procedures. I practiced signatures, studied Chase's website until I could navigate it blindfolded, and planned my next move. I told myself it was just going to be this once, just enough to get back on my feet, just enough to pay my rent and get my life together. But deep down, I think I already knew that was a lie. I had discovered something I was naturally good at, something that could solve all my problems with just a few hours of work. The Chase uniform hanging in my closet wasn't just a costume anymore. It was my new career. The next morning, I couldn't get Mrs. Patterson out of my head. Not because of guilt, that would come later, but because of the sheer simplicity of what I'd accomplished. In 30 minutes, I'd gathered enough information to potentially access a $400,000 credit line. The power of that realization was intoxicating. I spent the day researching online loan applications and banking security protocols. What I discovered was both encouraging and terrifying. Most banks relied heavily on basic identity verification that could be easily manipulated if you had the right information. Social security numbers, addresses, employment history, all things people freely shared with someone wearing the right uniform. But I needed to be smarter about the execution. Walking into banks without computer access was too risky and limited my options. I needed a different approach. That's when I discovered the beauty of Chase's online business banking portal. Using Mrs. Patterson's information, I created a fake business account for Patterson Family Consulting, LLC. The online application was surprisingly easy. Just basic information, a fake business description, and a promise to visit a branch within 30 days to complete the setup. Once the temporary account was active, I had limited access to Chase's internal loan application system. It wasn't full employee access, but it was enough to see how the process worked, what documents were required, and most importantly, what the approval thresholds looked like. Mrs. Patterson's house was indeed worth $400,000, and her credit score was excellent. She qualified for a 200 zero home equity line of credit with minimal documentation required. The application process was mostly automated. I filled out the forms using her information, uploaded fake employment verification documents I'd created using templates I found online, and submitted everything through the business portal. 3 days later, the loan was approved. I had successfully stolen $200,000 from a grandmother who thought she was helping her grandson go to college. The money was deposited into the business account I'd created, and from there, I transferred it to a series of personal accounts I'd opened using fake identities. Within a week, I had more money than I'd ever imagined having. I paid my rent for 6 months in advance. I bought a used BMW. I moved into a better apartment in Lincoln Park. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't worried about money. But the high didn't last long. Within 2 weeks, I was already planning my next target. The second victim was a man named Robert Chen, a small business owner I met at a coffee shop near the Loop. I wasn't even planning to scam anyone that day. I was just enjoying my new financial freedom, working on my laptop in an expensive cafe I could finally afford. Robert was sitting at the table next to me, on the phone with what was clearly his bank, frustrated about a loan application that had been delayed. "I don't understand why this is taking so long," he was saying. "I've been banking with you guys for 15 years. My credit is perfect. I just need a simple equipment loan for my restaurant." When he hung up, he looked so defeated that I almost felt bad for what I was about to do. "Excuse me," I said, leaning over slightly. "I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. Banking troubles?" Robert sighed. "Yeah, I'm trying to get a loan to buy new kitchen equipment for my restaurant. The bank keeps asking for more and more documentation, and every week they delay costs me money." "What bank are you working with?" I asked, though I already knew the answer from his conversation. "Chase. I've been with them forever, but their commercial lending department is a nightmare." I smiled sympathetically. "Actually, I work for Chase. Michael Stevens, commercial banking specialist." I handed him a business card I'd had printed the week before. "What kind of loan amount are we talking about?" Robert's face lit up. "Really? Oh man, this is perfect timing. I need about $150,000 for equipment financing." Over the next hour, I learned everything about Robert's business, his finances, and his dreams for expanding his restaurant. He was a good man, a hard worker who'd built his business from nothing. He employed 12 people and was a pillar of his community. And I was about to destroy him. "You know what, Robert? I think I can help you cut through all that red tape. Let me take down your information and I'll personally walk your application through our system." Just like with Mrs. Patterson, Robert gave me everything I asked for: Social Security number, business tax returns, bank account information, even his personal financial statements. "The thing is," I said, adopting a conspiratorial tone, "our best rates are reserved for customers who can move quickly. If you can get me all the documentation today, I can have this approved by tomorrow." Robert was so grateful he almost cried. He shook my hand and told me I was a lifesaver. He said employees like me were the reason he'd stayed loyal to Chase all these years. That night, I submitted Robert's loan application using the same method I'd used for Mrs. Patterson. His credit was even better than hers, and his business had strong cash flow. The $150,000 equipment loan was approved within 48 hours. But this time, I made a crucial mistake. Instead of creating a completely separate business account, I got greedy and tried to route the funds through a modified version of Robert's existing business information. I thought it would look more legitimate, leave fewer digital footprints. What I didn't realize was that Robert's accountant monitored his business accounts daily and would immediately notice an unexpected $150,000 deposit. 3 days after the loan was approved, Robert called the real Chase Commercial Lending Department to thank them for the quick approval. "I'm sorry, Mr. Chen, but I don't show any recent loan applications under your name," the real loan officer told him. "That's impossible. Michael Stevens from your commercial banking team just approved my equipment loan. The money was deposited yesterday. Sir, we don't have anyone named Michael Stevens in our commercial banking division." That's when Robert realized he'd been scammed. But by the time he reported it to the police and Chase began their investigation, I had already withdrawn most of the money and disappeared into the city's sprawling anonymity. The news coverage was minimal, just a small item in the Tribune's business section about a local restaurant owner being victimized by a banking scam. But for me, it was a wake-up call. I'd gotten sloppy, overconfident. I needed to be more careful, more systematic. I needed better fake identities, more sophisticated money laundering techniques, and most importantly, I needed to target people who were less likely to notice unusual account activity quickly. That's when I started focusing on elderly victims and people going through major life transitions, divorce, retirement, inheritance situations. People who were emotionally vulnerable and less likely to scrutinize every detail of their financial transactions. Over the next 6 months, I refined my system. I created multiple fake employee identities, developed relationships with corrupt employees at printing shops who could create authentic-looking documents, and established a network of money mules to help launder the stolen funds. I also started varying my approach. Sometimes I was a Chase employee, sometimes Wells Fargo, sometimes a mortgage broker or financial advisor. I learned to read people quickly, to identify their vulnerabilities, and tailor my pitch accordingly. The money kept flowing in, $100,000 here, $200,000 there. By the end of 2019, I had stolen over $2 million from dozens of victims. I bought a condo in River North, a new Porsche, expensive clothes and watches. I traveled to Europe, ate at the best restaurants, lived like the wealthy person I'd always dreamed of being. But success brought new problems. The more money I stole, the more attention I attracted. Chase's fraud investigation team was starting to notice patterns. Local police departments were comparing notes on similar scams. And somewhere in the back of my mind, a voice was getting louder. The voice that reminded me that every dollar I spent had been stolen from people who trusted me. People like Mrs. Patterson and Robert Chen, whose lives I'd damaged for my own gain. But I told myself I was too smart to get caught, too careful to make the kind of mistakes that brought down other criminals. I was wrong about that too. By month 3, I had turned loan fraud into a science. My apartment had become a command center, multiple laptops, printers for fake documents, and a closet full of different uniforms for various banks. Chase was my specialty, but I'd branched out to Wells Fargo and Bank of America when I needed to diversify my hunting grounds. The key was understanding that people wanted to believe. When someone walked into a bank, they were already predisposed to trust anyone wearing the right clothes and speaking with confidence. I exploited that trust with surgical precision. My typical day started at 6 a.m. with research. I'd scan social media profiles, LinkedIn accounts, and public records to identify potential targets. The perfect victim was someone with good credit but recent financial stress, a divorce, medical bills, or job loss. These people were desperate enough to jump at a special loan opportunity, but still creditworthy enough to qualify for substantial amounts. Take Jennifer Walsh, a 42-year-old nurse from Naperville. Her husband had left her with 2 kids and a mortgage she couldn't afford on her salary alone. I found her through a Facebook post where she'd mentioned struggling to make ends meet. Within a week, I had her complete financial profile and knew exactly how to approach her. I called her on a Wednesday afternoon, introducing myself as Marcus Thompson from Chase's Priority Customer Relief Program. I explained that due to her excellent payment history and current hardship, she qualified for an emergency consolidation loan at 2.9% interest, well below market rates. Mrs. Walsh, I said, my voice carefully modulated to sound both professional and sympathetic, I've been reviewing your account and I want to help you get back on your feet. This program is designed specifically for healthcare workers facing temporary financial difficulties. The hook was the specificity. I didn't just offer her money, I offered her a solution tailored to her exact situation. I knew she was a nurse, knew about her divorce, knew she was behind on her mortgage. That level of detail made my offer seem legitimate, even providential. "How did you know about my situation?" she asked, and I could hear the hope creeping into her voice. Your account shows several missed payments followed by catch-up payments, I lied smoothly. Our system flags customers who might benefit from debt consolidation. Plus, we have a special program for essential workers that was expanded during the pandemic. Within an hour, I had her social security number, employment details, and authorization to expedite her application. The loan I processed in her name was for $85,000, enough to pay off her mortgage and give her some breathing room. Of course, she'd never see a penny of it. But Jennifer Walsh was just one of many that month. There was David Kim, a small business owner whose restaurant was struggling. I convinced him he qualified for an SBA loan through Chase that would save his family's livelihood. The $120,000 I stole in his name would have actually saved his restaurant. Then there was Maria Santos, a single mother working 2 jobs to support her disabled son. I told her about a hardship grant that would help with her son's medical expenses. The $65,000 loan I processed would have changed their lives. Instead, it destroyed her credit and led to a lawsuit she couldn't afford to fight. Each victim required a different approach, a different story. But the underlying psychology was always the same. Find someone vulnerable, offer them exactly what they needed to hear, and exploit their trust before they had time to think critically about the offer. The money was flowing in faster than I could spend it. I moved to a luxury apartment in River North, bought a BMW, and started shopping at stores I'd only dreamed of entering before. But more than the material gains, I was addicted to the intellectual challenge. Each successful scam felt like solving a complex puzzle, and I was getting better at it every day. I developed a rating system for potential victims based on their vulnerability and credit limits. A-plus targets were people like Jennifer Walsh, high credit scores, recent trauma, and limited financial sophistication. B targets were more challenging, but still manageable. I avoided anyone with extensive banking experience or legal backgrounds. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was becoming an expert in banking and finance through my criminal activities. I understood credit systems, loan processing, and financial regulations better than many legitimate bank employees. In another life, I might have had a successful career in financial services, but I wasn't interested in legitimate success anymore. The thrill of the con, the rush of manipulating people into trusting me with their most sensitive information, had become more addictive than any drug. Each successful scam validated my intelligence and superiority over the suckers who fell for my schemes. By the end of month 3, I had processed over $2 million in fraudulent loans across 23 different victims. My success rate was nearly 90%, and I'd only had 2 people hang up on me during initial contact. I was, by any measure, exceptionally good at destroying people's lives. The closest call came with Robert Chen, the accountant from my second scam. 3 weeks after I'd processed his loan, he called the real Chase customer service line to ask about the status of his application. The representative had no record of any loan application, which sent Robert into a panic. I only found out because I'd been monitoring his email account since our initial contact. When I saw the email thread between Robert and Chase's fraud department, my blood ran cold. They were asking detailed questions about his contact with Marcus Thompson and requesting copies of any documentation he'd received. I spent a sleepless night crafting a response strategy. The next morning, I called Robert before Chase could reach him again. "Mr. Chen, this is Marcus Thompson from Chase. I'm calling because there's been a computer glitch in our system that's affecting several loan applications, including yours. Our IT department is working to resolve the issue, but in the meantime, you might receive some confusing communications from our customer service department." "I already did," Robert said, his voice tight with worry. "They said they had no record of my application." "Exactly the problem we're dealing with," I replied smoothly. "The applications are in our system, but they're not showing up in the standard customer service database. I'm calling all affected customers personally to let them know we're aware of the issue and working to resolve it. Your loan is still being processed, and you should receive your funds within the next week." It was a desperate gambit, but it worked. Robert thanked me for the personal attention and promised to ignore any further communications from Chase until his loan was processed. By the time he realized he'd been scammed, I'd already moved on to new victims and new banks. That close call should have been a warning. It should have made me realize that my luck wouldn't hold forever, that eventually someone would ask the right questions or push back hard enough to expose my operation. Instead, it just made me more careful about covering my tracks. 6 months into my career as a loan fraud specialist, I was living a life I'd never imagined possible. The luxury apartment in River North had become my fortress, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago River and enough space to host the kind of parties that attracted people who didn't ask too many questions about how a 24-year-old could afford such extravagance. My daily routine had evolved into something resembling a legitimate business operation, albeit one built entirely on deception. I woke up each morning in Egyptian cotton sheets, showered in a bathroom, with heated floors, and dressed in custom-tailored suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The irony wasn't lost on me that I looked more professional than most actual bank employees. The BMW had been just the beginning. I'd traded it in for a Mercedes-AMG GT, a car that turned heads and opened doors. When you pulled up to a restaurant or club in a $150,000 sports car, people made assumptions about your success and legitimacy. Those assumptions made everything else easier. But the real transformation was psychological. The scared, desperate kid who'd walked into that Chase branch 6 months earlier was gone, replaced by someone who moved through the world with absolute confidence. I'd learned that confidence was the most valuable currency in any con, more important than fake documents or elaborate backstories. My victim selection had become increasingly sophisticated. I'd developed a network of sources that fed me information about potential targets. A bartender at an upscale restaurant in Lincoln Park would tip me off about customers complaining about financial problems. A personal trainer at an expensive gym would mention clients going through divorces or job losses. A real estate agent would share details about people struggling with mortgage payments. These weren't formal partnerships. Most of my sources didn't even realize they were helping me commit crimes. They thought I was a legitimate loan officer who could help their friends and clients. The beauty of the system was that everyone involved believed they were doing something positive. Take the case of Amanda Richardson, a 38-year-old marketing executive who'd been laid off from her job at a major advertising firm. I learned about her situation from her yoga instructor, who mentioned that Amanda had been stressed about finding work and keeping up with her condo payments in Gold Coast. I approached Amanda at a coffee shop she frequented, timing my accidental encounter for when she was likely to be checking job listings on her laptop. After striking up a conversation about the competitive job market, I casually mentioned that I worked in business development for Chase and had seen companies use bridge loans to help executives during career transitions. It's not widely advertised, I told her, leaning in conspiratorially, but we have a program for high-earning professionals who are between positions. The idea is to provide short-term financing at favorable rates, giving you breathing room to find the right opportunity rather than settling for the first offer. Amanda's eyes lit up with interest. She was exactly the type of person who would appreciate an exclusive opportunity, something that made her feel special and chosen rather than desperate. Within a week, I'd processed a $95,000 loan in her name, telling her the funds would be available once she provided employment verification from her new position. Of course, there was no new position, and there would be no funds. But Amanda spent 3 weeks believing her financial problems were solved, which was 3 weeks longer than most of my victims got to feel hopeful. The psychological impact of my crimes was something I'd learned to compartmentalize. During the day, I was focused on the technical aspects of the fraud, perfecting documents, researching targets, managing multiple identities across different banks. But late at night, when the adrenaline wore off and I was alone in my expensive apartment, I sometimes thought about the real consequences of my actions. Jennifer Walsh, the nurse from Naperville, had called the fake number I'd given her 17 times in the 2 weeks after our meeting. I knew because I'd set up a voicemail system that recorded all incoming calls. Her messages started hopeful, then confused, then desperate. In the final message, she was crying, saying she'd already told her kids they could stay in their house and didn't know how to explain that Mommy had made a mistake. David Kim's restaurant had closed 3 months after I'd stolen his identity for the fake SBA loan. I'd driven past the empty storefront once, seeing the for lease sign where his family's dream used to be. His elderly parents had worked in that restaurant every day, and now they were probably wondering what they'd done wrong. But I'd developed techniques for managing these uncomfortable thoughts. I reminded myself that these people would have lost their money anyway, to medical bills, divorce lawyers, or business failures. I was just redirecting funds that were already destined to disappear. It was a rationalization, but it was enough to let me sleep at night. The money itself had become almost secondary to the thrill of the con. I was making more in a month than most people made in a year, but the real addiction was the intellectual challenge and the rush of successfully manipulating someone into trusting me completely. Each successful scam was like a drug hit, validating my intelligence and superiority. I wasn't just stealing money, I was proving that I was smarter than everyone around me, smarter than my victims, smarter than the bank security systems, smarter than the investigators who hadn't caught me yet. I'd started keeping trophies from each successful con. Not anything obvious that could incriminate me, but small mementos that reminded me of particularly clever manipulations. A business card from the coffee shop where I'd met Amanda Richardson. A pen from the bank branch where I'd first impersonated an employee. A photo of the Mercedes dealership where I'd paid cash for my car. These objects lived in a locked drawer in my home office, along with detailed notes about each victim and the techniques I'd used to manipulate them. It was dangerous to keep such records, but I couldn't resist documenting my success. Part of me was already imagining the book I might write someday, the movie that could be made about my exploits. The social aspect of my new life was equally intoxicating. I'd cultivated relationships with people who moved in Chicago's financial and social circles. Not close friendships, but the kind of acquaintanceships that provided cover and legitimacy. I was a regular at expensive restaurants, a familiar face at charity events, someone who belonged in rooms full of successful people. When people asked what I did for work, I had a carefully crafted story about being an independent financial consultant who helped high-net-worth individuals with complex transactions. It was vague enough to avoid detailed questions, but impressive enough to explain my lifestyle. The beauty was that it contained just enough truth to be believable. I did work with people's finances, just not in the way they imagined. But success was making me careless. The longer I went without consequences, the more invincible I felt. I was taking bigger risks, targeting more victims, and leaving more evidence of my activities. The rational part of my brain knew this couldn't last forever. But the addicted part didn't care. I was living in a bubble of my own creation, surrounded by luxury and validation, insulated from the real world by layers of lies and stolen money. Inside that bubble, I was successful, intelligent, and untouchable. I had no idea how thin those walls really were, or how quickly everything could come crashing down. By my first anniversary as a professional fraudster, I had refined my operation into something that would have impressed legitimate business consultants. I'd moved beyond random targeting to what I called ecosystem farming, identifying entire networks of potential victims and working through them systematically. The breakthrough came when I realized that financial stress often clustered in predictable patterns. A company laying off employees would create dozens of potential targets. A hospital system reducing staff would generate a pool of health care. Workers facing sudden income loss. A real estate market downturn would produce homeowners struggling with underwater mortgages. I'd developed relationships with people who had access to this information before it became public. A human resources consultant who worked with companies planning layoffs. A healthcare recruiter who knew which hospitals were cutting staff. a mortgage broker who saw early signs of payment difficulties. These sources didn't know they were feeding me intelligence for criminal activities. They thought I was a legitimate loan officer who could help their contacts during difficult transitions. The beauty of the system was that everyone involved believed they were part of something positive. My most successful ecosystem was built around Hartwell Industries, a manufacturing company in suburban Chicago that was planning to close its main facility. Through my HR contact, I learned about the closure 3 months before it was announced publicly. That gave me time to research the 247 employees who would be losing their jobs and identify the most promising targets. I created a comprehensive database with each employee's financial profile, family situation, and psychological vulnerabilities. Some were single parents who couldn't afford to miss a paycheck. Others were older workers who would struggle to find new employment. A few were recent immigrants who might not fully understand American banking systems. The genius of the approach was timing. I contacted each target within days of the closure announcement, when they were most vulnerable and desperate for solutions. My pitch was perfectly calibrated to their specific situation. Mr. Peterson, this is Jack Williams from Chase Bank's Employment Transition Services. I'm calling because we've been working with Hartwell Industries to provide financial support for affected employees during this difficult time. Based on your employment history and credit profile, you qualify for our emergency bridge loan program. The specificity was crucial. I wasn't making a cold call about a generic loan product. I was offering a targeted solution to their exact problem, backed by apparent institutional knowledge of their situation. Most people never questioned how I'd obtained their information or why a bank would proactively reach out to help them. Over 6 weeks, I processed loans totaling $3.2 million across 31 Hartwell employees. My success rate was 94%, with only 2 people refusing my offer and 1 becoming suspicious enough to contact Chase directly. The suspicious one was handled with my standard computer glitch explanation, which bought me enough time to complete the other applications. The psychological profiles I'd developed proved remarkably accurate. Sarah Martinez, a single mother of 3, broke down crying when I explained how the bridge loan would let her keep her kids in the same school district while she looked for work. Robert Kim, a 58-year-old machinist, was so grateful for what he saw as a lifeline that he recommended me to 2 of his co-workers. But the crown jewel was Thomas Brennan, Hartwell's former plant manager. Thomas had been with the company for 23 years and was devastated by the closure. He blamed himself for not seeing the warning signs, for not preparing his team better, for failing in his responsibility to protect his employees. I positioned the loan as a way for Thomas to help his former subordinates. Mr. Brennan, I've been authorized to offer you our maximum bridge loan amount, $150,000, specifically because of your leadership role at Hartwell. The bank recognizes that managers like you often feel responsible for helping your team through transitions like this. Thomas didn't just take the loan, he became an advocate for my services. He personally referred 8 other Hartwell employees to me, vouching for my legitimacy and the value of the program. His endorsement was worth more than any fake documentation I could have created. The Hartwell operation taught me that the most effective cons weren't about fooling people. They were about giving people what they desperately wanted to believe. Thomas wanted to believe he could still help his employees. Sarah wanted to believe her children's stability was protected. Robert wanted to believe his decades of hard work had earned him some institutional support. I wasn't just stealing their money. I was selling them hope, purpose, and dignity during their darkest moments. The fact that it was all an illusion made it more valuable, not less. My lifestyle had evolved to match my success. The River North apartment had been replaced by a penthouse in the Gold Coast. The Mercedes had given way to a Lamborghini that I only drove on weekends, keeping a more modest BMW for daily business activities. I'd hired a personal trainer, a stylist, and a housekeeper who thought I was a successful investment banker. The social circles I moved in had become increasingly exclusive. I was a regular at charity galas, art gallery openings, and private club events. My carefully crafted persona as an independent financial consultant had evolved into something more sophisticated. I was now known as someone who specialized in alternative financing solutions for high-net-worth individuals. The networking opportunities were incredible. I met lawyers who complained about clients struggling with divorce settlements, doctors dealing with malpractice insurance costs, and entrepreneurs facing cash flow problems. Each conversation was a potential lead, each relationship a possible source of future victims. But the real transformation was internal. The scared, desperate kid who'd started this journey 18 months earlier was completely gone. In his place was someone who moved through the world with absolute confidence, someone who could walk into any room and immediately identify the most vulnerable person there. I'd become a student of human psychology, able to read micro-expressions, voice patterns, and body language with startling accuracy. I could tell within minutes of meeting someone whether they were financially stressed, emotionally vulnerable, or psychologically susceptible to manipulation. These skills extended beyond my criminal activities. I was more successful in every social interaction, more persuasive in every conversation, more charismatic in every relationship. The techniques I'd developed for fraud had made me genuinely more effective as a human being. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd found my true calling through criminal activity. I was naturally gifted at reading people, building trust, and crafting compelling narratives. In a legitimate career, these abilities might have made me an exceptional salesperson, therapist, or business leader. But legitimate success felt boring compared to the thrill of the con. There was no rush quite like convincing someone to trust you with their most sensitive information, no satisfaction quite like executing a perfect manipulation, no validation quite like proving your intellectual superiority over everyone around you. I'd processed over $8 million in fraudulent loans across 127 victims. My success rate had stabilized at around 92%, and I'd developed contingency plans for almost every possible complication. I had multiple backup identities, several different bank relationships, and enough liquid assets to disappear if necessary. From the outside, I was living the American dream: luxury apartment, expensive cars, exclusive social circles, and unlimited financial resources. I was successful, respected, and envied by people who had no idea how I'd achieved my lifestyle. But inside the bubble I'd created, warning signs were starting to accumulate. Banks were sharing more information about fraud patterns. Victims were becoming more sophisticated about verifying loan offers. Law enforcement was developing better tools for tracking financial crimes. I told myself I was too smart to get caught, too careful to make the kind of mistakes that brought down other criminals. I had systems, protocols, and backup plans for every contingency. What I didn't have was an exit strategy, and that oversight was about to become the biggest mistake of my life. By summer 2020, I wasn't just running a fraud operation, I was living it. The line between Jack the criminal and Jack the successful financial consultant had blurred beyond recognition. I'd moved into a luxury apartment in River North, drove a leased BMW, and wore suits that cost more than most people's monthly rent. The pandemic had actually helped my business. With banks limiting in-person visits and people desperate for financial relief, remote loan consultations became the norm. I could now work from anywhere, setting up fake video calls with Chase backgrounds I'd downloaded online. My typical day started at 9 a.m. with coffee at a high-end cafe, reviewing my target list. I'd identified the perfect demographic: small business owners struggling during COVID, retirees looking to refinance, young families needing emergency funds, people who were vulnerable but had good credit scores. "Mr. Henderson, this is Jack Morrison from Chase Business Banking," I'd say into my phone, standing in Grant Park wearing my navy polo. "I've been reviewing your account, and I believe we can offer you some significant opportunities during these challenging times." The script was polished now. I'd learned to mirror their speech patterns, to sound concerned about their financial well-being, to position myself as their advocate within the bank. The key was making them feel special, chosen. I normally don't reach out directly to customers, I'd continue, but your account profile suggests you'd be perfect for our new COVID relief loan program. We're talking about rates as low as 2.9% with minimal documentation required. Thomas. Henderson owned a small restaurant in Lincoln Park. The pandemic had nearly destroyed his business, and he was desperate for capital to stay afloat. When I mentioned the low rates and quick approval process, I could hear the relief in his voice. That sounds too good to be true, he said, but I could tell he wanted to believe. I understand your skepticism, Mr. Henderson. That's exactly why I prefer to meet in person. How about we meet at your restaurant tomorrow? I can bring the paperwork, and we can get this started immediately. Meeting at their businesses or homes was my newest innovation. It added legitimacy and allowed me to gather even more personal information. I'd arrive with a professional folder, business cards, and a tablet loaded with official-looking forms. The next day, I sat across from Thomas in his empty restaurant, watching him sign documents that would eventually cost him everything. His wife brought us coffee, thanking me repeatedly for helping small businesses during these difficult times. "You're a lifesaver, Jack," Thomas said, shaking my hand. "Chase is lucky to have someone like you." I smiled and told him it was my pleasure to help. Inside, I felt nothing. The guilt had been replaced by a cold efficiency that scared me sometimes, but I pushed those thoughts away. This was business. By fall, I was processing an average of 8 fraudulent loans per month, each worth between $50,000 and $500,000. My cut was typically 30–40% of the loan amount, which I'd extract through various money laundering schemes I'd perfected, but success brought new challenges. The larger the operation, the more moving parts there were to manage. I needed better fake documents, more sophisticated money laundering methods, and increasingly elaborate stories to explain my lifestyle to friends and family. I told my parents I'd started a successful consulting business. I told my college friends I'd gotten into cryptocurrency early. I told my neighbors I worked in tech. Each lie required maintenance, and the web was becoming harder to manage. The real problem wasn't the lies I told others. It was the lies I told myself. I'd convinced myself that I was just taking advantage of a flawed system, that the banks could afford the losses, that my victims would be fine because they had insurance. But late at night, when I couldn't sleep, I'd think about Thomas Henderson's empty restaurant, about Mrs. Patterson's confused voice when Chase called about loan payments she'd never agreed to, about Robert Chen's small business that had been forced to close when his credit was destroyed. I'd created a disaster in dozens of lives, and I was getting rich from their pain. The worst part was how easy it had become. I could spot a perfect target from across a coffee shop, craft a convincing story in minutes, and have them signing papers within a week. It was like a superpower, except my superpower was destroying people's financial lives. November 2020 brought my first serious close call, and it should have been my wake-up call. Instead, it just made me more paranoid and more careful, which in retrospect only delayed the inevitable. I was working a target named Sarah Kim, a nurse at Northwestern Memorial who was looking to buy her first home. The housing market was crazy, and she needed a larger down payment to compete with cash offers. I'd positioned myself as a Chase mortgage specialist who could offer her a special healthcare worker loan program. We'd met twice at a Starbucks near the hospital, and she was ready to sign. I'd prepared all the paperwork, created a fake loan packet that looked perfect, and scheduled our final meeting for a Friday afternoon. But when I arrived at our usual Starbucks, Sarah wasn't alone. "Jack, I'd like you to meet my brother Mike," she said, gesturing to a serious-looking man in his 30s. "He's a financial advisor, and I wanted him to review the loan terms before I sign anything." My blood turned to ice, but I forced a smile. Of course. It's always smart to get a second opinion on major financial decisions. Mike had brought his laptop and immediately started asking detailed questions about the loan program, the interest rate calculations, and Chase's current lending policies. His questions were specific, technical, and designed to test whether I actually knew what I was talking about. "This healthcare worker program is interesting," he said, scrolling through the documents on his screen. "I don't see it mentioned on Chase's website. Can you walk me through how it works?" I launched into my prepared explanation, but Mike kept drilling deeper. He wanted to know about the program's funding source, the eligibility requirements, and why the rates were so much better than Chase's published rates. "You know what?" he said finally. "Why don't we just call Chase directly to verify some of these details? I have a contact in their commercial lending department." That's when I knew I was in serious trouble. "Actually," I said, checking my watch, "I just realized I have another appointment I need to get to. Why don't we reschedule for next week? That'll give you time to do your research, and I can bring additional documentation." I gathered my papers quickly, trying to look professional rather than panicked. "Sarah, I'll call you Monday to set up another meeting. Mike, great meeting you. I appreciate you looking out for your sister." I walked out of that Starbucks knowing I'd never see Sarah Kim again, and that Mike was probably already on the phone with Chase's fraud department. For the next week, I was convinced every knock on my door was the FBI. I avoided all my usual locations, didn't contact any of my current targets, and seriously considered abandoning the whole operation. But nothing happened. No arrest, no investigation, no consequences. After 2 weeks of paranoia, I convinced myself that Mike had probably just advised Sarah to go with a different lender, and that was the end of it. I was wrong. Mike had indeed called Chase, and Chase had indeed opened an investigation. But these things move slowly in the banking world, and I had no idea that my name was now in a database somewhere, flagged for suspicious activity. Instead of taking the warning seriously, I used the experience to improve my operation. I developed better background stories, created more convincing fake documentation, and started screening my targets more carefully to avoid anyone with financial industry connections. I also started carrying a fake business card with a real Chase phone number that redirected to a Google Voice account I controlled. If anyone wanted to verify my employment, they'd call the number, hear a professional voicemail message, and leave a callback request that I'd handle personally. The close call had made me more sophisticated, not more cautious, and that sophistication was about to become my downfall. Spring 2021 marked the beginning of the end, though I didn't recognize the signs at the time. What I saw was my most successful period yet. I was averaging 12 fraudulent loans per month and had expanded my operation to include fake investment opportunities and insurance scams. What I didn't see was the investigation that had been building around me for months. It started with patterns. Banks share information about fraud attempts, and my MO had become recognizable across multiple institutions. A young man claiming to be a loan officer, always wearing bank-branded clothing, always meeting clients outside of bank branches, always offering deals that seemed too good to be true. Detective Maria Santos of the Chicago Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit had been tracking these patterns since December. She'd connected 17 cases across 4 different banks, all involving the same basic scheme, all describing a suspect who matched my general description. But I was oblivious to all of this. I was too busy enjoying my success and planning my next expansion. My biggest score came in April with a target named David Walsh, a successful contractor who needed capital to bid on a major city project. I'd convinced him that Chase had a special program for minority-owned businesses and that I could fast-track his application for a $750,000 loan. David was different from my usual targets. He was wealthy, sophisticated, and had extensive business connections. But he was also under pressure to secure financing quickly, and my offer was exactly what he needed to hear. We met at his office in Schaumburg, and I gave him my most polished performance. Professional presentation, detailed loan documents, references to specific Chase policies and procedures. I'd even created a fake online portal where he could track his application status. "This is exactly what I've been looking for," David said, reviewing the terms. "When can we get this finalized?" "I can have the funds available within 72 hours, I told him. I just need you to sign the application and provide the initial documentation fee. The documentation fee was my latest innovation, a upfront payment of $15,000 that I claimed was required for loan processing. It was pure profit, and it helped me identify which targets were serious enough to move forward. David wrote the check without hesitation. But David Walsh wasn't just any contractor. He was connected, politically active, and had friends in law enforcement. When the promised loan never materialized and Chase denied any knowledge of the program, David didn't just file a complaint with his bank. He called his friend Detective Santos directly. "Maria, I think I've been scammed, and I think you're going to want to hear about this," David said during their phone call. This guy was professional, had all the right documentation, knew specific details about Chase's lending policies, but something about the whole thing felt off. Detective Santos had been waiting for a break like this. David's case wasn't just another fraud report. It was a direct connection to someone who could provide detailed information about the suspect's methods, appearance, and behavior. "David, I need you to tell me everything you remember about this person. Every detail, no matter how small." The description David provided matched perfectly with the suspect profile Detective Santos had been building. More importantly, David had kept all the documentation I'd given him, including business cards with phone numbers that could be traced. Within a week, Detective Santos had connected my Google Voice number to my real identity. The phone records showed calls to dozens of potential victims, and the pattern of activity painted a clear picture of an organized fraud operation, but they still needed to catch me in the act. The trap was set using an undercover officer named Detective James Chen, who posed as a small business owner looking for expansion capital. He'd heard about my services through a carefully constructed network of fake referrals, and he was ready to meet. I took the bait immediately. Detective Chen fit my target profile perfectly. Successful but cash poor, looking for quick financing, willing to meet outside of traditional banking channels. We scheduled our meeting for a Tuesday morning at a coffee shop in Lincoln Park. I arrived wearing my Chase polo, carrying my professional folder, completely unaware that I was walking into a carefully orchestrated arrest. "Mr. Morrison?" "Detective." Chen stood up as I approached his table. "Thanks for meeting with me. I'm really excited to hear about this loan program." I sat down and launched into my pitch, explaining the special small business lending program, the competitive rates, the quick approval process. Detective Chen asked all the right questions, expressed appropriate enthusiasm, and agreed to move forward with the application. "This sounds perfect," he said, reviewing the fake documents I'd prepared. "When can we get started?" "I can begin processing your application today," I told him. "I just need you to sign these initial forms and provide the documentation fee." That's when Detective Chen gave the signal. "Actually, before we do that," he said, reaching into his jacket, "I need to show you something." The badge came out first, followed immediately by backup officers who seemed to materialize from every corner of the coffee shop. "Jack Morrison, you're under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy to commit financial crimes." As the handcuffs clicked into place, I finally understood that my run was over. The sophisticated operation I'd built, the careful planning, the professional presentation, none of it had been enough to protect me from the simple fact that I'd been stealing from people, and eventually, all thieves get caught. The last thing I saw as they led me out of the coffee shop was the Chase polo shirt I'd been wearing, now evidence in a case that would destroy everything I'd built. The Cook County Jail wasn't like anything I'd seen in movies. It was worse, a concrete maze of desperation, violence, and broken dreams. As I sat in my cell waiting for my arraignment, I had plenty of time to think about the 47 victims whose lives I'd destroyed for a BMW and a nice apartment. My court-appointed lawyer, Sarah Martinez, was brutally honest during our first meeting. "Jack, they have you dead to rights. Video evidence, financial records, victim testimony, and your own confession to Detective Morrison. The DA is pushing for 15-20 years under federal fraud statutes." The numbers hit me like a physical blow. 20 years. I'd be 44 when I got out. Assuming good behavior. Half my life gone because I thought I was smarter than the system. What are my options? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Cooperation. Full disclosure of your methods, help them recover what money is left, and maybe, we can get it down to 8 to 10 years. The trial was a media circus. Local news stations ran stories about the Chase Bank imposter who'd stolen nearly $2 million from Chicago families. They interviewed some of my victims, and watching their pain broadcast on television was worse than any punishment the court could impose. Mrs. Patterson, now 73, had lost her home. The reverse mortgage I'd convinced her to sign had been processed by accomplices in my network before the fraud was discovered. She was living with her daughter, sleeping on a couch, her retirement dreams shattered. Robert Chen's restaurant had closed. The loan payments on money he'd never actually received had bankrupted his family business. 3 generations of work, gone because he'd trusted a young man in a Chase polo shirt. During my testimony, the prosecutor asked me to explain my methods in detail. As I described the psychological manipulation, the fake documents, the systematic exploitation of trust, I watched the jury's faces. They weren't just disgusted, they were terrified. I had shown them how easily their own trust could be weaponized against them. Mr. Thompson, the prosecutor continued, do you understand that your actions didn't just steal money? You stole security, peace of mind, and faith in institutions that people depend on? Yes, I whispered. I understand that now. But understanding doesn't undo damage. It doesn't give Mrs. Patterson her house back or reopen Mr. Chen's restaurant. It doesn't erase the sleepless nights, the anxiety attacks, or the financial devastation I'd caused. The judge sentenced me to 12 years in federal prison. As the gavel fell, I looked back at the gallery and saw some of my victims. Mrs. Patterson was crying. Mr. Chen just stared at me with an expression I'll never forget. Not anger, but profound sadness. That night in my cell, I finally understood. What I'd really stolen, it wasn't just money. I'd stolen something much more valuable and much harder to replace, the ability to trust. Prison changes you, but not always in the ways you expect. I spent my first year angry, at the system, at Detective Morrison, at the victims who'd made it so easy. It took a conversation with my cellmate, Marcus, to realize I was still running the same con, just on myself. Marcus was serving 15 years for armed robbery. Unlike me, he'd never pretended his crimes were sophisticated or justified. You keep talking about how smart your scam was, he told me one night. But all I hear is a man who's still lying to himself about what he really is. What am I then? I asked. A thief who got good at making people trust him. Same as any con man, just with better clothes. The truth of that statement hit harder than any judge's sentence. I wasn't a criminal mastermind or a financial genius. I was just someone who'd learned to exploit the basic human need to trust, and I'd used that skill to destroy lives. 2 years into my sentence, I got a letter that changed everything. It was from my mother. Jack, it began, I need to tell you something that happened to your father and me. As I read, my hands began to shake. My parents, now in their 60s, had been approached by a financial advisor who claimed to work for their credit union. He'd convinced them to consolidate their debts through a special program, had them sign documents, and disappeared with their information. They'd lost $45,000, their entire retirement savings. The method was different, but the psychology was identical to what I'd done. Someone had identified my parents as trusting, vulnerable targets and had systematically exploited that trust for financial gain. The worst part, my mother's letter continued, isn't the money. It's that we can't trust anyone anymore. Every phone call, every letter, every person who says they want to help, we assume they're lying. We've become suspicious of everyone, and that's no way to live. I sat in my cell and cried for the first time since my arrest. Not for myself, but for my parents, and for Mrs. Patterson, and for Mr. Chen, and for every person whose ability to trust had been damaged by people like me. That night I started writing letters, not to ask for forgiveness, I knew I didn't deserve that, but to acknowledge the full scope of what I'd done. I wrote to every victim I could remember, taking complete responsibility and explaining how my actions had affected real people with real lives. Most never wrote back. A few sent angry responses, but Mrs. Patterson surprised me. Her letter was brief. I appreciate your apology, Jack. I hope you use your remaining time to become someone different. I've been out for 6 months now. I work at a non-profit that helps fraud victims navigate the financial and emotional aftermath of being scammed. The pay is terrible, and I'll probably never own a BMW again. But every day I get to help repair some of the damage that people like me have caused. Yesterday, I helped an elderly man who'd been scammed by someone pretending to be from his bank. As I explained the recovery process, he looked at me and said, "How do you know so much about how these scams work?" I took a deep breath and told him the truth. Because I used to be one of the people who ran them. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Well, I guess that makes you the right person to help me fight back." Trust, I've learned, isn't just something you can take. It's something you can give back. One honest conversation at a time. It doesn't erase what I did, and it doesn't give my victims their money back. But it's a start. My name is Jack Thompson. I stole nearly $2 million by pretending to work for Chase Bank. I destroyed dozens of lives, including my own family's. And now I spend every day trying to earn back something I threw away for a luxury apartment and a nice car. If someone approaches you claiming to represent your bank, ask for their employee ID, call the bank directly to verify, and never sign anything on the spot. Trust your instincts, and remember that real bank employees will never pressure you to make immediate decisions about loans or financial products. I learned to exploit trust. Now I'm learning to rebuild it. It's much harder than stealing it, but it's the only way forward.